She clicked the wrong link. That was all it took. One Monday morning, one wrong Zoom link, and Sienna Vale found herself staring at a man she had never seen before. Dark suit, cold eyes. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace. It comes from power. Around him sat 8 men in expensive silence. She reached for the leave meeting button. "Stay," he said. "I've been expecting you." Her finger froze over the mouse. 'Cause on his screen, he was holding a document she had written in secret, a restructuring proposal no one was supposed to see. And he was smiling. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed to the edge of what you could take, this story is for you. Stay until the end, like the video, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The alarm went off at 6:47 in the morning, and Sienna Vale silenced it with the heel of her hand before it could wake Ethan. She lay still for a moment in the gray light, listening to the sound of rain against the window. Chicago rain. The kind that fell sideways and didn't apologize. She'd lived in this city for 6 years, and it still managed to surprise her with how indifferent it could be. Cold in May, relentless in March, beautiful sometimes, in a way that felt specifically designed to make you feel small. She sat up. The bedroom was dim. Ethan slept with one arm thrown across her side of the bed, the way he always did when he sensed she was leaving. Some unconscious reaching, some reflex of need that she'd stopped finding sweet about 3 months ago and had started finding suffocating. She didn't examine that thought. She was getting good at not examining thoughts before 7 in the morning. The bathroom mirror showed her what it always showed, a 31-year-old woman who looked 34 on a bad day and 28 when she'd slept enough. She hadn't slept enough. There were circles under her eyes that concealer could address but not erase, and a tension in her jaw she recognized as the byproduct of grinding her teeth again in her sleep. Her dentist had told her she needed a night guard. She'd said she'd think about it. That was 8 months ago. She brushed her teeth. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window in her robe and watched the street below, where a delivery driver was unloading boxes in the rain without a jacket, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had stopped caring whether they were wet. She understood that feeling completely. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table, 3 browser tabs visible. One was the calendar invite for the Monday morning department meeting, 8:30 a.m. Mandatory attendance, Q2 strategy alignment in the subject line, which in Veronica Hales's world meant 45 minutes of listening to Veronica restate things everyone already knew while implying that no one had thought of them before Veronica. One tab was her email, which already showed 11 unread messages, even though it was not yet 7. One was a draft document she'd been working on for 11 days, something she'd been careful not to save to the company server. She looked at that third tab for a long moment. Then she closed the laptop and went to get dressed. Hargrove Digital occupied floors 14 through 17 of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue that looked impressive from the outside and felt, from the inside, like every other open-plan corporate office in America. Rows of monitors, motivational posters no one read, the faint smell of burnt coffee and stale ambition. They'd been acquired 8 months ago by a holding company called Moretti Global Holdings. The announcement had come in an all-staff email with the subject line, "An exciting new chapter," which was the corporate equivalent of hearing your doctor say, "Now you may feel a slight pressure." Nobody knew much about Moretti Global. They were privately held. They had interests in real estate, logistics, media, and something vaguely described in their portfolio materials: integrated business services, which could mean anything from consulting to money printing. The acquisition had proceeded smoothly, as these things went. The branding hadn't changed, the org chart had stayed mostly intact, and the only visible difference in daily operations was a new quarterly reporting requirement and the addition of a small executive liaison team on the 16th floor that nobody ever saw. Sienna had looked up the company the day the acquisition was announced. She'd found a professionally designed website, a press release about synergies, and a photograph of Damian Moretti at a charity gala 3 years prior. He was dark-haired, somewhere in his early 40s, dressed in the kind of suit that didn't need to be expensive because everything else about how it was worn said it already was. His eyes, even in a posed charity photograph, had a quality she couldn't quite name, Not threatening, not warm, more like the eyes of someone who was assessing the distance to every exit in the room, even when they were smiling. She'd closed that tab, too. That was 8 months ago. She'd managed not to think about Damien Moretti since. Boy, she arrived at the office at 8:15. The elevator was slow. The lobby smelled like cleaning products and wet umbrellas. At her desk, she pulled up the calendar invite, clicked the Zoom link without reading the meeting ID closely, and poured coffee from the communal carafe while her computer loaded. She settled into her chair. She adjusted her camera angle out of habit, even though she barely cared how she looked anymore in these Monday meetings. She put her earbuds in. The Zoom call connected. She looked up at the screen and stopped. The room she was looking into was not Conference Room C, which was where the Q2 strategy alignment meeting was supposed to be happening. Conference Room C had a whiteboard behind whoever was presenting and a window that looked out onto the building across the street. The background she was looking at now was dark. Not dimly lit, but deliberately so. The kind of controlled lighting that didn't happen accidentally. A long table. 8 or 9 men seated around it, all of them in suits, all of them looking at the camera. At her. At the head of the table sat a man she recognized from a photograph she'd looked at once, for 30 seconds, 8 months ago, and somehow never forgot. Damien Moretti. He was looking directly into the camera. His expression was calm in the way that very cold water is calm. No surface agitation, no readable current, just depth that went somewhere you couldn't see. He had a folder open in front of him, and his hands rested on either side of it with a stillness that felt almost theatrical, as if the stillness itself was a message. Sienna's hand moved toward her mouse. "Stay," he said. His voice was quiet, clear, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry. "I've been expecting you." Her hand stopped. One of the men at the table glanced at Damien and then back at her. The others hadn't moved. Nobody in that room looked surprised. Nobody looked like this was an interruption. They all had the particular quality of men who had learned at some point in their lives to wait without fidgeting. "I think I have the wrong meeting," Sienna said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She was aware of her heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't. Not fast, exactly, but present, loud. That's one way to describe it. Damien picked up the folder in front of him and opened it. He turned a page, turned another. He wasn't performing nonchalance. He was simply doing what he was doing, and the room was quiet enough that she could hear, faintly, the sound of paper. "Do you recognize this?" He held a document up to the camera. The margins, the formatting, the section headers, the specific font she'd chosen because it was slightly less sterile than Times New Roman. The title, Operational Restructuring and Digital Integration, a strategic proposal for post-acquisition alignment. She had written that document. She had spent 11 evenings writing it, working at the kitchen table after Ethan went to sleep, keeping the tab minimized when he came for water. She had saved it only to a personal encrypted drive. She had not emailed it to anyone. She had not printed it. She had not discussed it with a single person. "Where did you get that?" she said. "Does it matter?" Yes. He considered that. "Fair enough. It was sent to me anonymously 11 days ago." He set the document down. "Which is about when you started writing it, I'd guess." Sienna's throat was dry. She reached for her coffee without looking away from the screen and took a sip. It tasted like nothing. "What do you want?" she said. "Right now?" His mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I want you to defend it." She should have ended the call. That was the rational response. Click leave, send an apologetic email to whoever had accidentally forwarded her the wrong Zoom link, and spend the rest of the day pretending this hadn't happened. That was what a reasonable person did. She didn't do that. She wasn't sure later whether it was the challenge in his voice or the simple animal fact that he was holding her work, her actual work, 11 evenings of it, written in secret because she knew it was good and she knew nobody in her department would ever read it. And he had read it. He had read enough of it to be sitting there at 7 in the morning with his folder open and his hands flat on the table like he was waiting for something. "Page 4, she said. "The reallocation of customer acquisition budget." I read page 4. "Then you saw the modeling. We're spending 40% of the digital budget on display advertising with a click-through rate below 0.3%. That money is going nowhere except into a metric that looks good in a quarterly report because nobody's measured the downstream conversion." Damien leaned back slightly. The board approved that budget. The board approved it based on benchmarking data from 2021. The landscape has moved. What worked then doesn't work now, and the people responsible for that budget know it, and they're not saying anything because saying something means admitting you've been running a strategy that hasn't worked for 2 years. Silence. One of the men at the table wrote something down. She didn't know why that made her heart rate spike further, but it did. Page 9, Damien said. The content infrastructure proposal. You're suggesting we centralize content production across all acquired digital properties under a single editorial framework. Under a strategy framework, not editorial. I'm not proposing a content farm. I'm proposing that we stop having 12 different teams producing content with 12 different voices that sometimes directly contradict each other, which is what's currently happening because nobody's talking to anyone else. That requires budget. Less than the display advertising we're wasting. I ran the numbers. It's on page 11. He looked down at the document. He turned to page 11. He was quiet for a long moment. You ran these projections yourself? He said. Yes. Who helped you? Nobody. He looked at her again, not the way her supervisor looked at her, with that particular mixture of competitive assessment and preemptive dismissal that Veronica had refined into an art form. Not the way Ethan looked at her, which was usually either distracted or seeking something she didn't have the energy to give. This was different. It was the look of someone doing arithmetic. Why did you write this? He said. She almost gave him the professional answer. Because I saw an opportunity for improvement. Because I believe in the company's potential. Some sculpted, defensible thing. Because nobody else was going to, she said instead. The silence stretched. No, Damien said. They weren't. Sad. The call ended 20 minutes later. She didn't remember most of what they discussed, or she did remember it, but it had the quality of a dream she was already losing at the edges. She remembered being precise. She remembered not backing down when he pushed back. She remembered the moment when one of the men at the table said something quietly to another one, and Damien looked at her and said simply, "Good answer." And she'd had to stop herself from asking which answer specifically because she hadn't been sure. When the call ended, she sat at her desk for a full minute without moving. Then she opened her email and found the calendar invite she'd actually meant to click, realized with a distant, slightly nauseated feeling that the Q2 strategy alignment meeting was still going on, and joined it 7 minutes late. Veronica noticed. She didn't say anything. She just looked at Sienna with that particular expression she had. Not quite cold, not quite warm. Something that lived in the narrow bandwidth between the two. Sienna said she'd had a tech issue. Veronica nodded. The meeting continued. For the next 4 hours, Sienna sat at her desk and worked and did not think about what had just happened. Or she thought about it constantly in the way that you think about something you're trying not to think about, which meant it was always there in the back of the room of her head, turning slowly under the lights. She did not tell anyone. Not Marcus, who sat 2 desks over and was the closest thing she had to a friend on the floor, a relationship built primarily on shared exasperation. Not Ethan, who called at noon and asked if she wanted him to pick up Thai food, and she said, "Sure, pad see ew." And he said he'd get it from the place on Dearborn, and they hung up. She ate lunch at her desk. She answered 11 emails. She attended a 30-minute sync about a campaign launch that had been delayed twice already. She formatted 3 reports. She did everything she normally did. At 4:45, her phone buzzed with an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body contained 4 sentences. A position has been created within the Executive Task Force reporting to Moretti Global Holdings. You are being considered for it. The role requires discretion and direct communication. Please reply with your availability for a call Thursday morning. She read it 3 times. There was no signature. The domain was a holding company address she'd never seen, not the standard Hargrove one. She checked it on her phone and it traced back to a subsidiary of Moretti Global that handled executive operations. It was legitimate. She stared at the email. Then she looked up at the office around her. The rows of monitors, the motivational posters, Marcus typing something fast and frowning at his screen, the door of Veronica's glass office across the floor where Veronica was on the phone and not looking out. The view from the 14th floor was of another building's parking structure. She'd been looking at that parking structure for 3 years. She hit reply. She typed, Thursday at 8 a.m. works. She sent it before she could talk herself out of it. Wednesday arrived the way that middle of the week days do when you're waiting for something. Slowly, and then all at once. She had spent Tuesday evening saying the right words to Ethan over Thai food and going to bed at the right time and lying awake for 2 hours afterwards staring at the ceiling. Ethan had asked if she was okay. She'd said she was tired. He'd accepted that in the way he accepted most things she said, which was to agree without investigating, and she'd felt a familiar complicated mixture of relief and something lonelier that she still hadn't named. On Wednesday, she was at her desk at 8:30 when Marcus rolled his chair over, the way he did when he had something to say that he wasn't going to say at full volume. Hey, he said, you hear anything weird about Veronica yesterday? Define weird. I was down in IT helping Dio with something. We were in the server log section, just running a routine backup audit. He paused. He had a way of pausing that meant he was deciding how much to say. There was an anomaly. Someone accessed your personnel files from Veronica's credentials last Thursday. Spent about 18 minutes in there. Sienna looked at him. That's normal, isn't it? She said, though her voice had an edge on it she couldn't quite smooth. Accessing personnel files for someone you supervise? Sure. 18 minutes plus cross-referencing with the Project Archive server where your recent work files are stored. Less normal. He looked at her steadily. You doing something? Something she might know about? Why would she know about anything I'm doing? I don't know. You just have that face. I don't have a face. Sienna, you have a face. You've had it since Monday. She looked at the window. The parking structure was still there, unchanged, unimpressed. Did Dio flag it? Dio mentioned it to me because he's careful and he noticed it was your file. He hasn't escalated it yet because he's not sure it means anything. Marcus paused again. Does it mean anything? She thought about the proposal she'd written for 11 evenings. She thought about Damian Moretti holding it up to a camera at 8:30 on a Monday morning and saying, I've been expecting you. She thought about the email with no signature. I'm not sure yet, she said. Okay. Marcus didn't push. That was what she valued about him. He had a finely calibrated sense of when to stop. I'll tell Dio to hold off. Tell him to keep a copy of that log. He looked at her for a beat. All right, he said, and rolled his chair back to his desk. The Thursday morning call was not what she expected, and she hadn't known what to expect, which meant she'd gone into it with the particular braced quality of someone who has decided not to be surprised and knows they will be anyway. The call lasted 40 minutes. She spoke with a woman named Claire, who had the voice and cadence of someone who spent their professional life in rooms where decisions were made quietly and finally. Claire explained the task force, a group assembled to evaluate integration strategy across several recently acquired companies, reporting directly to Damian Moretti's office. The role they were offering was director level, which was 2 grades above what Sienna currently held, with a compensation package she calculated in her head during the call, and arrived at a number she had to make herself not react to audibly. She would have direct access to Moretti Global's executive team. She would be expected to operate with full discretion. She would be expected to produce results, not updates. The company had, Claire said, a low tolerance for noise and a high tolerance for people who knew how to solve problems. Sienna asked 2 questions, one about reporting structure, one about the timeline for the role's objectives. Claire answered both precisely. One more thing, Sienna said before she could stop herself. The original Zoom meeting on Monday. Was that an accident? Claire was quiet for a moment. Those are things you'd have to ask Mr. Moretti, she said. Is that an option? It will be, if you accept the position. After the call ended, Sienna sat at her kitchen table. She'd taken the call from home, which Ethan had found odd but hadn't questioned, and looked at the middle distance for a while. Outside, Chicago had decided to be briefly, aggressively sunny, the kind of morning that made the lake look like hammered silver. She thought about Veronica in her glass office. She thought about Marcus keeping a copy of an anomalous server log. She thought about 11 evenings at this table, writing a proposal that nobody in her chain of command would ever have read, for a company that had been taken over by a man she'd looked at once in a photograph and immediately, instinctively, understood was not like the other executives in the portfolio materials. She picked up her phone and called the number Claire had given her. "I'll accept," she said when Claire answered. "I'll send you the paperwork this afternoon. One condition." A pause. "Go ahead." "I keep my current desk until the transition is complete. I don't want anyone to know I'm changing roles before I'm ready to tell them." Another pause, slightly longer. "That's acceptable," Claire said. "Mr. Moretti anticipated you might ask for something like that." After she hung up, Sienna sat for another moment. He anticipated. She was starting to understand that this was how he operated, not by controlling what happened, but by being 3 steps ahead of what could happen, so that by the time you made a decision, you were already inside an architecture he'd designed around you. It should have felt manipulative. It did feel manipulative. But there was something else in it too, something she didn't have clean language for yet. The particular quality of being genuinely accurately seen. Nobody had seen her work in 3 years. One man had held it up on a screen and asked her to defend it. She was smart enough to understand that wasn't nothing, and suspicious enough to understand that it wasn't everything, either. That Friday, Veronica called her into the glass office. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m., and Veronica was already behind her desk when Sienna came in, which was how Veronica always arranged these things. She was never the one who had to wait. The office had an expensive chair on Veronica's side of the desk, and a slightly less expensive chair on the other side. There was a framed print on the wall that said, "Leadership is a choice in a clean sans serif font," the kind of thing that told you nothing about the person who chose it. On the desk was a coffee mug that said "Boss Lady" and had the ring of a coffee stain under it from about 1,000 previous mornings. Sienna had always found that mug unbearable for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. "How's everything going?" Veronica said, in the particular way she said it, which was to say, not like she was asking, but like she was beginning a process. "Fine," Sienna said. "Good week, actually." "Good." Veronica looked at her computer screen and then looked back. "I wanted to circle back on the Q2 campaign. I noticed your Monday report had some different numbers than what we'd aligned on previously. I updated them based on new data." "Right, but we'd aligned on a direction in the last sync." "The direction was based on benchmarks that I think we should revisit." I explained the reasoning in the report. Veronica smiled. It was the smile she used when she was deciding whether to be openly difficult or strategically patient, and she chose, this time, strategically patient. "I appreciate your initiative, Sienna. I do. But alignment is important. We can't have individual contributors going off script when we've got a whole team working toward a shared goal." Individual contributors. She'd been at the company 3 years. She'd produced more functional work than anyone else on the floor. She had a master's degree in marketing analytics and had spent 7 years before this at 2 other companies where people had used words like exceptional and rare in her performance reviews. And she was an individual contributor. "Understood," she said. Her voice was level. Her hands were in her lap, and she was pressing her thumb into the base of her index finger, a pressure that helped her stay even. "Great." Veronica clicked something on her computer, signaling dismissal. "Oh, one other thing. Have you had any contact with the Moretti Global Executive Liaison team recently?" The silence lasted approximately 1 second. Sienna was careful with that second. "Why do you ask?" she said. "Just that there's been some communication going through channels that touches our department. I like to keep track of anything that involves my team." "Your team." There it was. "Nothing that would affect the department," Sienna said. Veronica studied her for a moment. Her eyes were very pale, a blue so light it was nearly colorless, and they had a quality that Sienna had spent 3 years interpreting. Not quite kind, not quite cruel, but very, very aware. "Good," she said. "Keep me in the loop, would you? These things work better when we're all on the same page." Sienna nodded. She stood up. She walked out. In the elevator on the way down to get air, she stood very still and thought about what Veronica had just revealed without meaning to, that she knew something was happening, and she was afraid of what it was. Not suspicious, afraid. There was a specific quality to the way Veronica had said, "Keep me in the loop," that Sienna had heard before. It was the quality of a person who needed information not to use it, but to control it. She thought about Marcus's voice saying someone accessed your personnel files from Veronica's credentials. She thought about Damian Moretti saying he'd received her proposal 11 days ago, sent anonymously. She stood in the cold gray October air outside the tower and pressed her thumb into the base of her finger, and the arithmetic in her head started producing numbers she didn't like. Saturday night, Ethan asked her what was wrong. They were on the couch. She'd been staring at the TV without processing anything for the better part of an hour. He'd refilled her wine glass twice without her noticing. "Nothing," she said. "You've had that look all week." Marcus said the same thing. "What look?" "I don't know. Apparently I have a look." Ethan shifted to face her. He was a good-looking man in the way that some men were good-looking. Generically, pleasantly, in a way that had probably opened some doors early and hadn't been examined since. He was kind when he wasn't distracted, and he was often distracted. She'd been with him for 2 years, and there were things she genuinely liked about him, and things she'd been managing, which was not the same as liking. "Is it work?" he said. "It's always work." "Is it Veronica?" "It's work," she said again. He watched her for a moment. "You know you can talk to me, right?" She looked at him. She thought about what she'd tell him: the Zoom call, the document, the email with no signature, the offer, the server logs. Veronica's pale eyes saying, "Keep me in the loop." She thought about how he would respond, with concern probably, but also with the particular male instinct to solve, to advise, to offer frameworks that would make him feel useful. And then somehow, by the end of the conversation, she would be managing his feelings about her situation instead of the situation itself. "I know," she said. "I'm okay. I'm just tired." He nodded. He turned back to the TV. She looked at the ceiling. On Sunday, she opened her laptop at the kitchen table while Ethan was at the gym. She opened the encrypted drive. She opened the proposal. She added 4 pages. New projections. A cleaner breakdown of the digital infrastructure gap. A section she'd been avoiding, which addressed the anomaly she'd noticed 6 months ago in the departmental budget. A recurring quarterly transfer to a vendor she'd tried to look up once and found registered to a shell company in Delaware that led to another company, and then went dark. She'd made a note about it and done nothing because that was what you did when you found something you didn't understand, and you had no power to investigate and nothing to gain from making noise. She wrote it all down. She saved it to the encrypted drive. She sat back and looked at what she'd written. There was a line in the document now that hadn't been there on Friday. A number. She checked it against the budget report she had access to. Checked it again. Calculated the quarterly figures back 2 years. More than $2 million. Transferred incrementally to a vendor that didn't exist in any registry she could find. She stared at that number for a long time. Then she closed the laptop and picked up her phone and sent a message to Marcus. Monday morning, before the 8:30 meeting. "Can you get Dio in a room?" His reply came in under a minute. "Yeah, what's this about?" She typed, "I need you to help me find something." She set the phone down on the table and looked out at the street, where Chicago was doing what it did. Moving, indifferent, continuous, loud with rain. Whatever this was, it had already started. She'd clicked the wrong link on a Monday morning and found herself in a room full of men who were already watching, already waiting, already holding her work in their hands. She didn't know yet if that was a gift or a trap. She suspected it might be both. And somewhere in a building she'd never set foot in, a man with dark eyes and a folder full of her words was, she was almost certain, already 3 steps ahead of whatever she was about to do next, waiting for her to arrive at a conclusion he'd already drawn, watching to see whether she'd have the nerve to say it out loud. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Monday arrived the way bad weeks always start. Not with a bang, not with a warning, just with an ordinary alarm and the smell of coffee and the particular silence of a morning that doesn't yet know what it's about to become. Sienna was at her desk by 7:58. The floor was still mostly empty. The overhead lights had that flat institutional quality they always had before the rest of the team arrived. Like the office was briefly, honestly itself before it put on the performance. She kept her jacket on. The building ran cold in October, and she'd stopped bothering to ask facilities to fix it. Marcus arrived at 8:03, which for him was practically sprinting. He dropped his bag at his desk, looked at her, looked at the expression on her face, and said nothing. That was the thing about Marcus. He had a finely calibrated read on when to wait. He got his coffee. He came back. He sat. Dio's coming at 8:15, he said. He's got about 10 minutes before his shift brief. 10 minutes is enough. You want to tell me what we're looking at before he gets here? She'd thought about this on the train. How much to say? How much to hold back? Not because she didn't trust Marcus. She trusted him as much as she trusted anyone in this building, which was a limited but real quantity, but because information had a weight to it, and she was about to put some of it in someone else's hands, and she'd learned the hard way that you couldn't take that back once you'd done it. Budget anomalies, she said. Recurring quarterly transfers to a vendor I can't verify. Marcus looked at her steadily. He had the face of a man who'd grown up being the smartest person in rooms that didn't know what to do with that, which meant he'd learned to carry the knowledge quietly. How big? Over 2 years, with what I can access. Something north of 2 million. He was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. And you think I think somebody's been creative with how the money moves, she said. I need Dio to confirm whether what I'm seeing is a real pattern or whether I'm reading budget reports wrong. You don't read budget reports wrong. I know, but I want someone else to confirm it. Dio arrived at 8:13, which was 2 minutes early, which was exactly how Dio operated. He had the professional anxiety of someone who'd been burned by being late once and never forgiven himself for it. He was mid-20s, compact, with the particular wariness of an IT security analyst who spent his days knowing about problems other people had no idea were happening. He looked at Sienna and then at Marcus and said, "What's going on?" "Close the gap," Marcus said, meaning the space between their desks. Dio pulled up a chair. Sienna opened her laptop. She'd pulled the budget report she had access to, which was more than she was technically supposed to have access to, because 3 years of working adjacent to the finance team meant she'd accumulated passwords and access credentials the way you accumulate anything in a long job, gradually, unremarkably, through 100 small practical necessities that nobody ever revoked. She turned the screen toward Dio. "I need you to look at these vendor codes," she said. "This one specifically." She pointed. ICS Holdings, LLC, quarterly transfers started about 26 months ago. Dio leaned in. His eyes moved the way IT people's eyes moved when they were reading data. Fast, pattern-seeking, not reading for comprehension, but for anomaly. He pulled up something on his phone, typed, waited. "Delaware registration," he said. "Filed 27 months ago. Single listed agent, law firm in Wilmington. No other public records." "Can you trace it further?" "Not from here and not in 10 minutes. He looked up. "This is a shell." "That's what I think." "Where's the money going after it hits this entity?" "That's what I can't see from what I have. The transfers show as vendor payments, services rendered, but there's no service contract I can find in the archive." Marcus said, "Veronica approves the vendor payments for our division." Nobody said anything for a moment. The office was starting to fill up around them. People arriving, bags dropping, chairs pulling out. The ordinary Monday morning machinery beginning to turn. "Keep the server log you found Thursday," Sienna said to Dio quietly. "Don't delete it. Don't flag it to anyone yet. Can you pull access records for the finance archive as specifically who's been in the vendor payment section in the last 30 days? Dio looked at her for a beat. He was calculating something. Risk, probably. She knew the feeling. "This goes somewhere official. I need to be covered," he said. "I know. If it goes somewhere official, you helped identify a fraud. That's not a bad place to be." He nodded slowly. "I'll have something by end of day." He left with 2 minutes to spare before his shift brief. Marcus turned to her. "You going to tell me the rest of it?" "Not yet," she said, "but there is a rest of it." "There's always a rest of it." He picked up his coffee. "All right," he said. And that was the end of it, which was why she trusted him. But at 9:40, her desk phone rang. Internal extension, executive floor, 16. She looked at it for 1 ring, 2 rings, then picked up. "Sienna Vale," she said. The voice on the other end was not Claire. It was a man, low register, unhurried. "Ms. Vale, this is Paul Reeves from the Executive Liaison Office. Mr. Moretti would like to schedule a meeting with you this week, in person." Her hand tightened slightly on the receiver. in person. There's a private dining room at the Caldwell Hotel on Erie Street, Wednesday evening, 7:30. His office will send a car. She looked out at the floor. Veronica's glass office was visible from her desk. The door was closed. The blinds were open. Veronica was on the phone, facing the window, and as Sienna watched, she turned, slowly, casually, with the specific deliberateness of someone who had been watching through the reflection in the glass, and looked directly at Sienna's desk. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. "Wednesday works," Sienna said into the phone. "Good, 7:15 for the car." She hung up. She looked at her screen. She did not look back at Veronica's office. Under her desk, she pressed her thumb into the base of her finger until the pressure steadied her. Tuesday was the day Ethan got played, and she didn't know it yet. He called her at lunch, which he sometimes did, not always, but often enough that it didn't register as unusual. He asked how her day was going. She said fine. He asked if she was still stressed about work. She said it was easing up. He said he was glad. She said she had to get back to it. They said "I love you" in the brisk, habituated way of two people who'd been saying it long enough that it had become punctuation. She didn't find out until Thursday what that Tuesday call had been about. Or rather, what someone else had asked him to ask about. But that was Thursday. On Tuesday, she just hung up and went back to her monitor and thought about Wednesday. The car was a black sedan, clean, no identifying signage. It was waiting at the curb at 7:14, which was 1 minute early, which she was starting to understand was how Damian Moretti's operation worked, precisely, anticipatorily, with a 1-minute margin that was not accidental but demonstrative. We are the kind of organization that arrives 1 minute early. Adjust accordingly. She was wearing the good blazer, charcoal, fitted, the one she wore when she needed to feel like she knew exactly who she was. Underneath it, her heart was doing something complicated that she refused to classify as nerves and instead classified as heightened situational awareness, which was the same thing with better posture. The Caldwell Hotel was the kind of establishment that didn't advertise its exclusivity because it didn't have to. The lobby had the hush of old money, not silent but quieted, as though the building itself had learned discretion over decades of hosting conversations it would never repeat. A man in a dark suit met her at the entrance and walked her through a corridor she hadn't known existed, past a room that smelled like cedar and leather, through a door that required a key. The private dining room held 1 table, set for 2. Damian Moretti was already there. He stood when she entered, not the showy kind of standing, not a performance, just the automatic courtesy of someone who had been raised to do it and hadn't unlearned it. He was taller than she'd expected from the camera. The suit was dark navy, the kind of cut that had probably required several fittings. His eyes were what she remembered, that quality of constant, patient assessment. "Ms. Vale," he said. "Mr. Moretti," she said. They sat. A server appeared briefly, poured water, disappeared. Damian looked at her across the table with an expression she'd been trying to decode since Monday and still couldn't fully read. "I appreciate you coming," he said. "You sent a car." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but adjacent. "I did." "Then I suppose we're both invested in the conversation." He picked up the menu and looked at it for a moment. She picked up hers and looked at nothing. She was aware of the room. Small, quiet, sealed from the outside world in a way that felt both safe and, if she was honest, slightly like a trap. Expensive trap, though. She'd give it that. They ordered. The server disappeared again. Damian set his forearms on the table, not leaning in, just present, and said, "Tell me what you found." She looked at him. "You first." He held her gaze for a moment. "Fair," he said. "I acquired Hargrove 8 months ago because it had good bones and a digital infrastructure I wanted for a larger integration. What I didn't know was that someone had been using Hargrove's vendor payment system as a personal finance mechanism for the better part of 2.5 years. He said this the way you described something you found both infuriating and, in some analytical part of yourself, professionally impressive. Incremental transfers. Clean documentation. A shell company that traces to 3 more shell companies before it disappears offshore. Whoever set it up knew exactly what they were doing. "How much do you know?" she said. I know the shape of it. I don't have the thread that pulls it together. He looked at her. I believe you might. What makes you think that? Because you spent 11 evenings writing a proposal that included a section about a vendor anomaly you noticed 6 months ago. Most people notice something like that and do nothing. He paused. You wrote it down. She was quiet for a moment. The food arrived. She barely registered it. You read it more carefully than I thought. I read everything carefully. She believed that completely. She believed it in the way you believe a fact that rearranges other facts around it. I have partial numbers, she said. Quarterly transfers over 26 months. The vendor code traces to a Delaware shell. My IT contact confirmed the registration anomaly. Total, from what I can access, slightly over 2 million. But I don't have visibility into the full vendor payment system. I only see what touches my division's budget. There's more than your division, Damien said. Significantly more. She absorbed that. How much more? We believe the total, across all affected cost centers, is closer to 7 million. The number sat in the air between them. 7 million, she said, over the full period. Some of it from before the acquisition, when oversight was less comprehensive. Some of it in the 8 months since. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. From my company. She understood then why he was sitting across from her in a private dining room in a hotel that required a special key to find. He wasn't just investigating. He was furious, in the controlled, strategic way of someone who had learned that fury is more useful when it's cold. Who knows you're investigating, she said. A small number of people I trust entirely. And you think Veronica Hales is responsible? I think Veronica Hales is the primary architect, yes. I think she had help. He looked at her steadily. I need evidence that will hold. Something that connects the shell company to her directly. A transaction, a communication, a signature, anything that creates a direct line. Why me? She said. You have an entire organization, legal teams, investigators. I do, and I've had them on this for 3 months. He picked up his water glass, held it, didn't drink. What they've found isn't enough. What I need is someone inside the building who understands how it works, who can access the archive without triggering Veronica's network, and who has enough standing in the organization that their presence in the relevant files doesn't raise flags. You want me to get evidence from inside. I want you to help me understand what you've already found, he said carefully, and to help me find what you haven't yet. She looked at him for a long time. The dining room was very quiet. Somewhere beyond the sealed door, the hotel's life continued, muffled, indifferent. If I help you, she said, and this goes wrong, Veronica burns my career to the ground. Yes, he said. He didn't dress it up. She noted that. And if it goes right, then a person who has been stealing from this company for over 2 years faces consequences. He set the glass down. And the proposal you spent 11 evenings writing gets implemented by someone who has the authority to implement it. She looked at her plate. She wasn't hungry. I'll think about it, she said. Of course. He picked up his fork. Now eat something. The food here is excellent. It was excellent. She ate it anyway, tasting almost none of it, running numbers in her head the entire time. Passant. Thursday was when everything accelerated. She decided on Wednesday night, lying awake next to Ethan again, staring at the same ceiling, running the same calculations, that she would help. She hadn't decided it dramatically. It was more like she'd acknowledged something she'd already decided. The moment she'd written that vendor anomaly into her proposal, she'd made a choice. She'd just been waiting to find out what the choice meant. She got to her desk at 8. Marcus was already there. He had the look he got when he'd found something. Slightly too still, slightly too careful, like a man who'd picked up something fragile and wasn't yet sure what to do with it. Dio came through, he said when she sat down. She turned to face him. What did he find? Access logs for the finance archive. Last 30 days. He turned his monitor slightly toward her, shielding it with his body from the rest of the floor. Veronica's credentials, 14 separate access events, 7 of them outside business hours. Which files? Vendor management, payment authorization, and... He paused. Your personnel file, again, 3 times in the last week. Sienna looked at the logs. The timestamps were laid out neatly in 2 columns. Date, duration. 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday. 6:12 a.m. on a Saturday. midnight on a Tuesday. Nobody accessed financial archives at midnight for legitimate reasons. There's more, Marcus said. He looked uncomfortable in a way he almost never looked. Dio found a secondary email account, a personal one, not the company system. It was used to send an email to an external address, encrypted relay, he can't see the content, but the timing matches the day before the last vendor transfer. How did Dio find a personal email account? He's very good at his job and he was looking hard. Marcus met her eyes. Sienna, if Veronica figures out Dio's been in these logs, she won't. If she does, Marcus. She put her hand briefly on his arm, just for a second. I know what's at stake. I need you to trust me for a little longer. He looked at her for a moment. He was a careful man, Marcus. Careful with what he committed to, careful with what he said. All right, he said finally, but I want it on record that I said this feels like it's moving fast. It's moving at exactly the speed it needs to. She wasn't sure that was true, but it was what she had. The call from Ethan came at 12:30. She almost didn't pick up. Hey, he said. He sounded slightly too casual. She'd been with him 2 years. She knew his registers. Did anything happen at work this week? Something involving the executive floor? She went very still. Why? She said. Someone I know. You don't know him. He works in commercial real estate. He mentioned that Moretti Global's been doing some internal investigations and that there might be some restructuring in the companies they acquired. He asked if you'd said anything about it. A pause. I just mentioned it casually. He seemed curious. She pressed her thumb into the base of her finger. Hard. Who is this person? Just a contact. We grabbed a drink Tuesday. A contact you've never mentioned. I know people you haven't met, Sienna. What's his name? A short silence. Why does that matter? Ethan. What's his name? Greg. Greg Waller. I met him through, a networking thing. She stared at her monitor. The screen was showing a spreadsheet she wasn't reading. She could feel her pulse in her temples. What did you tell him? She said. Her voice was precise. Level. The kind of level you produce by spending energy on it. Nothing. I said I didn't know anything because I don't. Good, she said. Don't talk to him again. Sienna, I'm serious. Don't talk to him again. And don't tell him anything I've said to you. Not in the last week. Nothing. Another silence, longer this time. You're scaring me a little. Good, she said again. Be scared. Be careful. She took one breath. I love you. I'll explain later. Don't talk to Greg Waller. She hung up. She sat for exactly 30 seconds. Then she typed a message to Marcus. I need Dio to look up a name. Greg Waller. Any connection to Hargrove, Moretti Global, or Veronica Hales. His reply came back in under a minute. On it. She looked up at Veronica's office. The blinds were closed today. First time in 3 years she'd seen those blinds fully closed. She thought about what that meant. A person closed their blinds when they didn't want to be watched, or when they were doing something they didn't want seen. She picked up her phone and sent one text to the number Claire had given her. I need to move faster. Someone's already watching. She sent it and put the phone face down on her desk. Somewhere in this building, a network she'd only just begun to understand was already tightening around her, and she just put herself directly in the center of it, not because she hadn't had a choice, but because she'd made one. 3 minutes later, Marcus walked over. He set his phone on her desk, screen up without saying a word. The screen showed a LinkedIn profile. Greg Waller, Commercial Real Estate, Chicago. Second connection, listed on the profile, Veronica Hales. Sienna looked at that name on the screen for a long time. She thought about Ethan on a Tuesday, having a casual drink with a man he'd never mentioned, answering questions about her work for what he thought was small talk. She thought about how careful Veronica was, how many moves she thought ahead. She thought about how Veronica had spent 3 years watching her, managing her, keeping her in a room with a view of a parking structure, and had never once, not for a single second, believed she was a threat. Until now. Until a wrong Zoom link and 11 evenings at a kitchen table and a man who read carefully and waited. She picked up her phone. She opened the message she'd sent Claire. No reply yet. She looked at the closed blinds across the floor. She was standing in the middle of something that had started long before she'd walked into it, and there was no version of the next few days where she came out the other side without it having cost her something. The question wasn't whether she could stay safe. The question was whether she could move fast enough, smart enough, to make sure what it cost her was worth it. Her phone buzzed. Not Claire. A number she didn't recognize. The text read, "She knows you met with him Wednesday. You have less time than you think." She stared at the screen. No name, no context, just those two sentences, sitting there on her phone like a stone dropped in still water. She looked around the floor. Marcus at his desk, the rest of the team arriving and settling in, ordinary Monday machinery, and felt, for the first time, the specific quality of a woman who had crossed a line she didn't see coming and can't uncross. She typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, "A friend. Check the server room on 15. Cabinet C7. There's a file with your name on it." She sat very still. Cabinet C7. Her name. Whatever Veronica had been building in those late-night archive sessions, whatever she'd been preparing during the hours her blinds were open and her eyes were watching, some part of it had Sienna's name on it. And that meant this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about her. She didn't go to the server room immediately. That was the first instinct she had to fight. The pull toward the things she'd just been told about. The urgency that someone had deliberately manufactured by sending that text. The specific human reflex of running toward the fire to see how bad it was. She'd learned, in the years since she'd started noticing how power actually moved inside organizations, that urgency was often a tool. Someone wanted her in that server room right now, while she was off balance, while her hands were slightly unsteady and her thinking was running 2 tracks at once. She put her phone face down on the desk. She went to the bathroom, ran cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was not panicking. She was going to decide not to panic. There was a difference. She dried her hands. She went back to her desk. She opened a spreadsheet she'd been working on, a real one, legitimate, a content performance analysis, and spent 11 minutes working on it with the focused attention of someone who needed witnesses to her ordinary morning. Then she picked up her phone and typed to Marcus, "I need to check something on 15. Cover for me if Veronica asks." His reply, "How long? 20 minutes. Go." What? The 15th floor was ET infrastructure and server operations, which meant it had the particular atmosphere of a place that existed to support other places. Drop ceilings, fluorescent lights, the low mechanical hum of cooling systems running continuously behind thin walls. She'd been down here twice in 3 years, both times for routine password resets. Nobody from the marketing division came to 15 without a reason, which meant she needed to move fast and look like she had one. The server room required a badge. She had one, legacy access from a project 18 months ago that IT had never revoked, because IT was perpetually understaffed and access revocation was low on the priority list. She badged in without hesitating because hesitating outside a badge reader looked like someone doing something wrong. Inside it was cold, the kind of cold that didn't care about you. The servers ran in rows behind glass partitions, their indicator lights blinking in rhythms that had nothing to do with human time. Cabinet C7 was in the second row, metal-faced, slightly taller than the others. Standard storage for physical documentation and archived drives. It was unlocked. She stood in front of it for a moment, then she opened it. On the middle shelf, in a manila folder with no label on the tab, was a document with her name on the cover page. Not her name on a report she'd written. Her name as a subject. Sienna Vale. Conduct review. She picked it up. She stood in the cold and read it. It took her 4 minutes. She read every page twice. By the time she finished, something in her chest had gone very quiet in the way that things go quiet right before they break. The document was a formal HR file, dated 2 weeks ago. It contained a summary of alleged misconduct, unauthorized access to financial systems, theft of proprietary business strategy documents, but this was the one that made her stop breathing for a moment. A paragraph alleging that she had shared confidential company restructuring plans with an outside party in exchange for personal gain. There was a printed email exchange, formatted to look like an internal forward, between 2 addresses she didn't recognize, in which someone purporting to be her discussed leaking internal documents to a competitor. The email addresses weren't hers, but her name was in the body of the text, referenced 3 times, clearly enough that anyone reading the file would connect it to her without needing the addresses to match. At the bottom of the page in the signature line for the reporting supervisor, Veronica Hales. Date filed 6 days ago, which was 1 day before the Wednesday dinner with Damian Moretti. Sienna stood in the cold server room and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, what she was looking at. This wasn't a reaction to what she'd been doing. This had been prepared before Veronica knew exactly what she was doing. This was Veronica building a weapon and storing it somewhere she could reach it when she needed it, which meant that the moment Veronica felt genuinely threatened, this file would go to HR, to legal, possibly to the new ownership. And Sienna would spend the next 6 months defending herself against allegations instead of investigating anything. She thought about Damian's words at dinner. She had help. She thought about the text. She knows you met with him Wednesday. Someone in Damian's orbit, or close enough to see it, had told Veronica about Wednesday, the dinner, the Caldwell Hotel, the private room. She took out her phone and photographed every page of the document. Then she put it back exactly as she'd found it, closed the cabinet, and walked out of the server room at a pace that was professionally brisk and nothing else. In the elevator going back up, she pressed her thumb into the base of her finger and breathed. Marcus took one look at her face when she sat back down and said, quietly, "That bad?" "Worse," she said. "Tell me." She told him. Not everything. Not Damian, not Wednesday, not the full architecture of what she'd been building with Dio's access logs and the budget anomalies. But she told him about the file, what it contained, what Veronica had signed. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight, looking at the surface of his desk. "She's been building this for a while," he said. "At least 2 weeks. Probably longer, in her head. The email exchange in the file. Can Dio verify it's fabricated? Possibly. The addresses don't match mine, but if she's good enough, if whoever helped her is good enough, they'll have created shadow accounts that are close enough to create reasonable doubt. Who helped her?" Sienna looked at her screen. "That's the part I don't know yet." She knew one thing, though. She knew that Ethan had taken a casual drink with Greg Waller on Tuesday. She knew Waller was connected to Veronica. She knew Veronica had known about Wednesday by Thursday morning at the latest. And she knew that the only person she'd said anything even remotely connected to any of this to, in anything like casual conversation, was Ethan. Not the details, but enough. Enough for someone asking the right questions over a beer to gather the shape of something happening. She hadn't told Ethan about Wednesday directly, but she'd told him she had a work meeting. She'd come home at 9:30 smelling like an expensive hotel restaurant, and he'd asked and she'd said it was a client dinner, and he'd nodded and gone back to whatever he was watching. Greg Waller had a second connection listed. She hadn't looked past Veronica's name. She looked now. She went to the LinkedIn profile on her phone and scrolled the connections. Not all of them were visible, only mutual ones. But second connections meant she could see who they connected through. There was Veronica's name. And 2 connections down, linked through a commercial real estate firm, Ethan Cross. Not a coincidence. Not a networking thing. A chain. Veronica to Waller to Ethan, and Ethan, without knowing it, or maybe knowing some of it, she didn't know yet which was worse, back to her. She sat very still. The overhead lights hummed. Someone across the floor laughed at something on their screen. The ordinary office continued to exist around her, indifferent to the fact that she had just found out her boyfriend was connected, however passively, to the person trying to destroy her. She was not going to fall apart at her desk. She wasn't. She put her phone in her bag. She opened the spreadsheet. She worked on it for 6 more minutes without seeing a word of it. She called Ethan from the stairwell at noon. It was the only place in the building where she could have a conversation without someone 3 feet away. He answered on the second ring. "Hey." "How do you know Greg Waller?" she said. Not a question. A statement she needed an answer to. A pause. "I told you, networking." "Ethan, how do you actually know him? Not the version you gave me this morning, the real one." Longer pause. She heard him exhale. "He reached out to me about 2 months ago. Said he was in commercial real estate, that he'd seen my name through a mutual contact, wanted to grab a drink and talk about investment opportunities in the Chicago market. Mutual contact. A woman he said he worked with. I didn't think anything of it. She was a name I recognized. What name? He said it like he already knew what was coming. Veronica Hales. The stairwell was very cold. The concrete walls had a particular quality of echo that made everything sound slightly more exposed than it was. She pressed her back against the wall and looked up at the fluorescent light above the door. She set you up as a source, Sienna said. Her voice was flat. Not angry. Not yet. The anger was there. She could feel it like a heat below the surface, but this wasn't the moment for it. She used you to get to me. She asked Waller to build a relationship with you, get close enough that you'd mention my work, and when you did, she used it. Sienna, I know you didn't. I know you didn't know what you were doing, but you told him things. I told him nothing specific. You told him I was stressed about work. You told him I had a meeting Wednesday night. What else? Silence. Ethan, what else? He asked if you'd been talking to anyone from the executive level. I said you'd mentioned something about a task force. She closed her eyes. She opened them. Okay, she said. Sienna, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I know. And she did know. She believed him. But the thing about being used unknowingly was that it produced the same result as being used knowingly, and the result was what she had to live with. Don't contact Waller again. Don't answer if he calls. If Veronica reaches out to you for any reason, you tell me immediately. Are you in danger? She thought about what to say to that. Are you in danger? Was the kind of question that deserved a real answer. And the real answer was, she didn't know yet, but the range of possible outcomes had just narrowed significantly toward the bad end, and the clock had started running at a speed she hadn't anticipated. I'm handling it, she said. That's not an answer. It's the one I have. I'll call you tonight. She hung up. She stood in the stairwell for another 20 seconds. Then she went back to the floor, sat at her desk, and sent a message to the number she'd heard from only twice. I need a meeting, tonight if possible. She has a file on me. She knows about Wednesday. Someone in your circle talked. The response came back in 4 minutes. I know, tonight, same car, 7 o'clock. Don't go to your desk after 5. Go directly from the building. She read that twice. I know. He'd known before she told him, which meant he had someone watching too, someone close enough to the 15th floor or to Veronica's circle to know what was in that cabinet before she did. The architecture of it was becoming clear to her now, the full shape of it. Damien Moretti had been running a parallel investigation for months, with resources she couldn't see. He'd watched Veronica. He'd watched the building. He'd known about the file, probably, before she'd walked into the server room. He'd let her find it herself. She didn't know yet whether that was protective or calculated. With him, she was beginning to understand it could be both simultaneously. At 4:45, Veronica's office door opened. Sienna saw it in her peripheral vision and kept her eyes on her screen. She heard heels on the floor, not coming toward her desk, not immediately, moving toward the printer station, then stopping. Sienna! She looked up. Veronica was standing 6 feet away with a printed document in her hand and an expression Sienna had never seen on her before. Not the strategic patience, not the competitive assessment, something tighter, something that had been managed all day and was now showing at the edges. My office, Veronica said. Quick word. The meeting lasted 8 minutes. She knew because she checked the time when she went in and checked it again when she came out. 8 minutes that she would run back through her head for the next several hours, parsing every word for what it revealed and what it was designed to conceal. Veronica sat. Sienna sat. Veronica put the document face down on the desk and folded her hands on top of it. I want to give you the opportunity to be honest with me, Veronica said. About what? Sienna said. About whether you've been in contact with the Moretti Global Executive Team in a capacity that wasn't disclosed to this department. She looked at Veronica, at the pale, colorless eyes, at the practiced stillness of a woman who had been managing people for long enough that she knew how to read the micro-expressions of someone deciding what to say. I've had some preliminary conversations about potential opportunities within the larger organization, Sienna said. That's not something that requires departmental disclosure. It does when it involves sharing proprietary information. I haven't shared proprietary information. That's not what I've been told. There it was, the activation of the file. Veronica was beginning the process, not filing it, not escalating it, not yet, testing it, running it at her to see what she'd do, see if she'd cave, apologize, become manageable again. Who told you that? Sienna said. I'm not in a position to share that. Then I'm not in a position to respond to an unattributed allegation. She kept her voice entirely level. If you have a formal concern, you should take it to HR. If this is an informal conversation, I'd prefer to table it until I've had a chance to speak with someone in legal. Veronica's expression shifted, the smallest tightening around the eyes. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected hedging or fear or the particular quality of cooperative anxiety that most people produced when their supervisor implied they were in trouble. You've already spoken to legal? She said. I said I'd prefer to before continuing this conversation, Sienna said carefully. Veronica looked at her for a long moment. The document under her hands was still face down. She didn't flip it over. She wasn't ready yet. Or she'd decided not to be ready yet, which was a different thing. Think carefully about the choices you're making, Veronica said. Her voice was quieter now. The quality of it had changed, not softer, but more direct. The mask of managerial language was getting thin. You've been here 3 years. I've been here 9. This organization has a way of remembering who it trusts. Sienna stood up. She didn't push the chair back hard. She did it evenly. I appreciate the conversation, she said, and walked out. She was 3 steps from the door when Veronica said behind her, I know about Wednesday. Sienna kept walking. She did not turn around. She did not let her pace change by a single beat. Inside, something had just shifted in a way she couldn't shift back. Veronica had just shown her hand. Not the file, not the formal allegation, but the surveillance, the knowledge, the reach. She'd wanted Sienna to know she was watching, which meant she'd moved past the phase of gathering information into the phase of applying pressure. Sienna got to her desk. She picked up her bag. She did not open any drawers, did not take anything she'd have to explain. She looked at Marcus. He was watching her with the careful expression he used when things were bad. She glanced toward the elevator, then back at him. He nodded. He understood. He turned back to his screen and picked up his phone and began, she saw, to dial someone. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She got in. The doors closed. In the lobby, she walked through the glass doors and into the October air, and the cold hit her face, and she stood on the sidewalk and breathed for exactly 5 seconds. Then she moved. Away from the building entrance, away from the cameras she knew were positioned above the doors, around the corner onto a quieter street where she stopped with her back to a brick wall and took her phone out. She had 1 hour and 15 minutes before the car came. She opened the encrypted drive on her phone. She looked at the document. She looked at the vendor codes, the timeline, the shell company trail. She looked at the section she'd added on Sunday night, the $2 million number that was now, according to Damien, the smaller portion of something much larger. She thought about what Veronica had just told her without meaning to, that she knew about Wednesday, which meant she had someone watching the hotel or watching Damien's logistics, which meant her reach extended past the building, past the corporate structure, into something that connected to the Moretti global world in a way that nobody had mapped yet. She thought about she had help. She thought about $7 million. She thought about a file with her name on it, sitting in a cabinet on the 15th floor, ready to be activated the moment Veronica decided the pressure wasn't working. And she thought about the text from a number she still didn't know. A friend. Someone else was in this building, or connected to it, who was watching Veronica and had wanted Sienna to find that file before Veronica used it. Someone who wasn't Damien. He'd have contacted her through Claire, someone operating independently or separately who had their own reasons to want Veronica's architecture exposed. She didn't know who that was. She didn't know how far Veronica's network went. She didn't know yet who else in her world had been turned. What she knew was this. In 1 hour and 15 minutes, a car was going to arrive. She was going to get in it. She was going to sit across from a man who knew things she didn't know and needed things she had, and she was going to have to decide in that room how much of herself she was willing to put on the table to end something that had been running long before she'd walked into it. She pressed her thumb into the base of her finger. She held it there. The city moved around her. Taxis, pedestrians, the distant sound of a train. Chicago, indifferent as always, moving at its own speed toward nothing in particular. She pushed off the wall and started walking toward the car pickup point. She wasn't the same person who'd clicked a wrong Zoom link 2 weeks ago. She wasn't sure yet what she was instead. She was about to find out. The car arrived at 7:01, 1 minute late, for the first time. She noticed it the way you notice a crack in something you'd been counting on to hold, and then she got in anyway because there was nowhere else to go. The driver didn't speak. The city moved past the windows in the particular way it moved at night. Lights smearing through rain-streaked glass, intersections strobing past, the lake somewhere to the east existing as a darkness beyond the lit edge of everything. She sat in the back with her bag in her lap and her hands flat on her thighs, and she did not look at her phone because there was nothing on it that would help her right now. They didn't go to the Caldwell. She registered this when they passed Erie Street without turning. Her body registered it first, a tightening across her shoulders, a slight adjustment in her breathing. She watched the streets and said nothing for 90 seconds. And then she said, "Where are we going?" "Change of location," the driver said. "Mr. Moretti will explain." She looked at the back of his head. She looked at the door handle. She thought, with the particular clinical clarity of someone running threat assessment in real time, about what she knew and what she didn't. She knew the car was connected to the same number Claire had called from. She knew she'd gotten into it voluntarily. She knew that if Damian Moretti wanted to harm her, he had had multiple opportunities in the last 2 weeks, and had instead sent cars and set tables and held her proposal in his hands like it was something worth reading. She looked back out the window. They drove north, into a neighborhood she knew marginally, River North, moving toward the edge of it where the buildings got taller and more anonymous. The car pulled into the underground entrance of a building she didn't recognize. No hotel signage, no lobby visible from the street. The kind of building that existed in the margins of a city's public identity. A man she hadn't seen before, younger than the driver, darker jacket, met her at the elevator and rode up with her without speaking. 42nd floor. The elevator opened into a corridor with 2 doors, and beyond the second door was a room that stopped her for a half second despite everything. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The entire northern face of Chicago spread below in the rain, lit and moving, bridge lights reflected in the river 40 stories down. The room itself was spare. A long table with laptops open, 4 people she didn't know working with the focused silence of people on a deadline, and Damian Moretti standing at the window with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the forearm, a phone in one hand and his other arm crossed over his chest. He looked up when she came in. Something in his face was different from every other time she'd seen it. The controlled assessment was still there, but compressed, like a man who'd been running calculations for 18 hours and had just arrived at a number he didn't like. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me what's happening first." He looked at her for a beat. Then he put the phone on the table. Veronica filed the conduct review this afternoon. 4:52 p.m. HR received it. Legal received a copy. And a copy went to the outside counsel that represents Moretti Global's board interests. The timing landed on her like cold water. 4:52. 7 minutes after she'd walked out of that office. Veronica hadn't waited to see if the pressure worked. She'd activated the file the moment Sienna had refused to fold. "She moved faster than I expected," Sienna said. "She moved faster than I expected," Damian said. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not anger, but the subterranean quality of it, the heat under the floor. "Which means someone told her about tonight. Someone in your operation." "Yes." The room was very quiet for a moment. One of the people at the laptops kept typing. The rain hit the windows in waves. "Who?" she said. "We're working on that." He moved to the table. He turned one of the laptops toward her. On the screen was a financial document, not the partial budget report she'd been working from, but a full-scale forensic audit. Columns of transactions, dates, amounts, account numbers. Red-flagged entries running down the left margin in a pattern that looked, at a glance, like a heartbeat on a monitor that had gone wrong. "My forensic team has been building this for 3 months. What you found with your IT contact fills the gap we couldn't close. The transfers in your division connect to 4 other cost centers in the acquired portfolio. Total movement over 31 months, 6.8 million. She looked at the screen. The number was real. She'd known it intellectually since Wednesday, but seeing it documented, laid out in the flat, institutional language of a forensic audit, made it concrete in a way that the abstract figure hadn't been. "That's enough to prosecute," she said. "Enough to prosecute, yes. Enough to move tonight, maybe." He straightened. "The problem is the conduct review. If it goes to the board before we can present the fraud evidence, the narrative becomes disgruntled employee under investigation for misconduct made allegations against her supervisor. Everything you found gets dismissed as retaliatory. Veronica walks. The money stays hidden. And you—" He stopped. "And I get destroyed," she said. "And you face serious professional and potentially legal consequences from fabricated allegations, yes." He said it without softening it. She appreciated that more than she could express right now. "So we need to move tonight," she said. "We need to move tonight," he said. She pulled out her phone. She opened the photographs she'd taken in the server room. She turned the phone toward him. "This is what's in the file. The fabricated email exchange. The addresses are close to mine, but not mine. If your forensic team can pull the account creation metadata, they'll show a registration date after I started asking questions. She built them retroactively." He took the phone. He looked at the photographs with the fast, absorptive attention she'd first seen on a Monday morning Zoom call. He handed the phone to one of the people at the laptops without looking away from her. "Can you verify fabrication on those accounts?" The person, a woman, early 30s, the quality of someone who'd slept in this room recently, took the phone and started working without responding, which was apparently the answer. "There's something else," Sienna said. She held his gaze. "She has someone watching your logistics. She knew about Wednesday within hours. That's not a coincidence, and it's not just a LinkedIn connection through Ethan. That's someone with access to your operation." Damien's jaw tightened. The subterranean heat she'd heard in his voice became briefly visible in his face. "I know." "You know who it is?" "I have a strong suspicion." He moved toward the window and back, not pacing exactly, more like a man who needed his body to be moving while his mind worked. "There's an attorney, external counsel we've used for acquisition contracts. He has visibility into our meeting logistics because he drafts the non-disclosure agreements for executive dinners." A pause. "He has a relationship with Veronica that predates the acquisition by 4 years. How long have you suspected him?" "Since this afternoon, when Veronica moved faster than she should have been able to." "Can you neutralize him tonight?" He looked at her. "He's being handled." She didn't ask what that meant. She decided she didn't need to know what that meant. "Here's what I need from you," Damien said. He came back to the table and stood across from her, and the city blazed behind him in the rain, 40 stories of lit consequence. "The forensic audit is solid, but it doesn't have a signature. Every transfer was authorized through a layered approval chain designed to distribute the paper trail. We can follow the money, but following the money isn't the same as proving who directed it. Veronica's name isn't on any transaction directly. It's all done through proxies, through subordinates who signed off without understanding the full picture. You need a direct connection. I need one document, one communication, one irrefutable link between Veronica Hales and the shell company's beneficial owner." He looked at her steadily. "Your IT contact found a secondary personal email account she used to send an encrypted communication to an external relay the night before a major transfer. If we can get the metadata on that relay, the originating IP, the timestamp correlation, it breaks the chain she's built. Dio found the email, but not the content. We don't need the content, we need the IP." He put both hands flat on the table. "Which means I need your IT contact to pull that data tonight, before Veronica has any reason to delete the account." Sienna stood very still. She thought about Dio. 20-something, careful, not signed up for any of this. She thought about what she was about to ask him to do, which was pull unauthorized data from a personal account using forensic tools that were technically within his access as an IT security analyst, but which were absolutely not within the scope of what anyone had asked him to do. "If I bring him into this fully," she said, "he needs to be protected, formally. Your legal team put something in writing tonight that covers him from any blowback. Done. Marcus too. Done. And Ethan?" She stopped. She pressed her thumb into her finger. "Ethan didn't know what he was doing. He was used. Whatever happens with Veronica's allegations, his name stays out of it." Damien looked at her. There was something in the look she didn't want to examine too closely. Not pity, not calculation, something more human than either. His name stays out of it, he said. She nodded. She picked up her phone. She called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been holding the phone. I need you and Dio, she said. Tonight. Right now. Can you get him? He's sitting next to me, Marcus said. We've been here for 2 hours. She blinked. What? We figured something was happening. We stayed. A pause. We found something too. Something you need to see. What did you find? The shell company, ICS Holdings. Dio traced the beneficial ownership through 3 entities. His voice had the particular quality of a man delivering something he wishes he wasn't delivering. The final layer, the actual beneficial owner, it's not just Veronica. She looked at Damien. He was watching her face. Who else? She said into the phone. Marcus said a name. The name was Paul Reeves, the man who had called her on Monday to arrange the Wednesday dinner. The man from Damien Moretti's own executive liaison office. The room changed temperature, or she changed temperature. She couldn't tell which. She lowered the phone from her ear and looked at Damien and said, Paul Reeves. She watched his face. She watched the exact moment the calculation resolved into something different. Not surprise, not exactly, but the particular quality of a man who has just had a suspicion confirmed that he was hoping was wrong. His right hand, flat on the table, pressed harder against the surface. Say that again, he said. Your IT contact put Paul Reeves as beneficial owner of the shell company. She kept her voice even. She needed it even. The man who called me to arrange Wednesday's dinner. The man from your executive liaison office. He and Veronica built this together. The people at the laptops had stopped typing. The room was completely silent except for the rain. Damien straightened up slowly. He picked up his phone from the table. He dialed a number and put it to his ear, and she watched his face while it rang, and nobody who was watching that face would have felt comfortable about what was on it. Someone answered. Damien said in a voice that was very quiet and very final, Find Paul. Don't let him leave the building. Don't discuss it. Just find him. He hung up. He stood with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he set it down on the table with a deliberateness that was louder than any sound he could have made. She understood now why the car had been a minute late. Someone had been stalling. Someone inside this operation had known tonight was moving and had tried to buy time. Paul Reeves had called her. He'd set up Wednesday. He'd chosen the car, the hotel, the timing. He'd had full visibility into every move Damien made in the last week and a half, and he'd been feeding it to Veronica, and together they had built a $7 million theft and a ready-made weapon against anyone who got close to uncovering it, including the man who owned the company they'd been stealing from. He set me up to walk into this, she said, not accusingly, just working it through out loud. He put me in front of you. He sent the wrong Zoom link. Damien looked at her. The Zoom link wasn't from my office, he said slowly. I thought it was an accident. I thought you'd stumbled into a meeting you weren't meant to be in, and I took the opportunity. He stopped. If Reeves controlled the calendar logistics, he staged it, she said. He sent me the wrong link deliberately. He put me in front of you because he wanted you focused on me. Wanted you running an inside investigation through a civilian asset while he managed the evidence trail. She felt the shape of it crystallizing as she spoke. I was the distraction. While you were vetting me, running me through your process, he had 3 more weeks to move money. The rain hit the windows in a heavy, sustained wave. Damien's face was very still. She'd seen him controlled before, every time she'd sat across from him. This was something different. This was a man who had built a career on seeing the angle, on being 3 steps ahead, realizing someone had been 6 steps ahead of him for months. The proposal, he said. He sent it to me. Yes. He knew I'd respond to it, knew I'd want to meet the person who wrote it. He engineered the whole entry point. Yes. He turned toward the window. He looked at the city for a long moment. When he turned back, the stillness in his face had resolved into something harder and cleaner, the kind of focus that didn't have any room in it for the emotion he'd just moved through. We move in 2 hours, he said. We present the forensic audit to legal counsel. Not Reeves's contact, someone else, someone I trust outside this operation, simultaneously with the fabrication evidence on Veronica's conduct file. We preempt the board contact. We get ahead of the narrative. He looked at her directly. I need your IT contacts data on that email relay in 90 minutes. She put her phone back to her ear. Marcus was still on the line. Did you hear that? She said. Most of it, Marcus said. 90 minutes. Dio says give him 65. She looked at Damien. 65 minutes. Something almost crossed his face. Almost. Tell him to make it 50. She relayed it. From the phone, Dio's voice, distant, already typing. Fine. 50. But I need a formal document from their legal team before I hand over anything. She looked at Damien. Tell him it's being drafted right now, Damien said. He turned to the woman at the laptop who'd been working on the fabricated emails. Get Chen on the phone. I need protective documentation for 2 individuals, names Marcus and Dio. Last names? He looked at Sienna. Marcus Webb, Dio Adeyemi. Webb and Adeyemi, full whistleblower protection language, signed tonight. He moved to his own laptop. He opened it and started typing with a focus that foreclosed any other conversation. She stood at the window for a moment while the room reorganized itself around the new information. Outside, Chicago continued its indifferent life. Lights, rain, the river far below carrying its dark water toward the lake. She could see the Hargrove building from here, or she could see the approximate location of it, the tower on Michigan Avenue where the 14th floor had a view of a parking structure and where, in the server room on 15, a folder with her name on it was waiting to be activated. She thought about Veronica at 452, filing that document. She thought about Paul Reeves, somewhere in this building or not. Somewhere that Damien's people were currently moving toward. She thought about what it meant that this entire 2-week sequence, the Zoom call, the dinner, the car, all of it, had been engineered by a man who worked for Damien, against Damien, using her as the instrument. She thought about Ethan. She thought about what she was going to say to him when this was over. Not the version that managed his feelings, not the version that protected him from the full weight of what had happened. The real version. She owed them both that, even if it cost something. Sienna, Damien's voice. She turned. I need you focused, he said. I am focused. You look like you're somewhere else. I'm processing, she said. There's a difference. He held her gaze for a moment. You have every right to be... Don't, she said. Don't do the thing where you acknowledge that this is a lot. I know it's a lot. What I need right now is to know that when we walk this evidence into a room in 2 hours, the room is the right room, and the people in it are the right people, and Paul Reeves cannot get to them first. Damien looked at her. Then he said, The room is secure. I chose them 2 weeks ago specifically because they have no connection to Reeves or to any Hargrove-adjacent legal relationships. They've been waiting. A pause. I didn't know about Reeves tonight, but I prepared for the possibility that someone I trusted was compromised. I just didn't know who. You prepared for a leak you didn't identify. Yes. That's either very smart or very paranoid. In my experience, those are the same thing. She looked at him for a moment. The city blazed behind him. His sleeves were still rolled up, and his face showed the particular texture of a man who'd been awake for most of 20 hours and was running on something colder and more durable than energy. She thought, I still don't know, for certain, whether you're the safe bet or the dangerous one. And then she thought, it doesn't matter anymore. She was past the point where safety was the operative variable. The operative variable was whether they could get the evidence into the right hands before Veronica's weapon landed. She pulled out the chair closest to her. She sat down. She opened her laptop. Tell me what you need me to do in the next 50 minutes, she said. Damien sat across from her. He pulled the forensic audit toward him. He opened to the section that needed her division's data, the piece that connected the partial numbers she had to the full chain his team had built. Walk me through every vendor code you found, he said. Every anomaly, every timestamp. I need your version of the picture mapped against mine. She opened her encrypted file. She started talking. The rain kept hitting the windows. The clock on the laptop read 8:14 p.m. Somewhere below them, in the building's lower floors, Damien's people were looking for Paul Reeves. Somewhere across the city, on the 14th floor of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue, Veronica Hales was either sitting in her office or had already gone home, believing she'd activated enough pressure to end this before it became something she couldn't control. She was wrong. She just didn't know it yet. And at 8:14 p.m., on a Thursday in October, with rain on the glass and a forensic audit open on the table between them, and 50 minutes on a clock that nobody had set, but everyone was running against, Sienna Vale sat across from the most dangerous man she'd ever met and gave him every piece of information she had, not because she trusted him completely, not because she was certain this ended well, but because the alternative was a folder with her name on it landing on a board member's desk before morning. And she had come too far, worked too hard, spent too many evenings at a kitchen table writing things nobody asked her to write, to let that be the end of the story. She talked. He listened. He asked precise questions. She answered them precisely. Outside, the city ran its continuous, indifferent life. Inside, in a room 40 floors above it, the last 90 minutes of Veronica Hales's empire had already... The 50 minutes became 43. Dio sent the data at 8:57 p.m. A compressed file, encrypted, with a short message attached that read, IP origin confirmed, single device. Registered to a residential address in Lincoln Park. I cross-referenced the billing name against the Hargrove employee directory. It's her home router. She sent it from her house. And then, after a line break, the particular addition of someone who understood what they'd just done and needed to say it plainly. This is real. This isn't close. This is her. Sienna read it once. She turned the laptop toward Damien. He read it. He sat back. He looked at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds, the first time she'd seen him look anywhere other than directly at the problem in front of him. And then he looked at the woman at the other laptop and said, "Get Chen and the full legal team on a call. Now. All of them." The room shifted into a different register of motion. Not faster, exactly. Everything had been moving fast for the last hour, but more deliberate. The way things move when the outcome stops being theoretical. She sat with her hands on the table and felt, for the first time in 2 weeks, something she didn't immediately have language for. Not relief. It was too early, and she was too careful for relief. Not triumph. Something quieter and more exhausted than either. The particular sensation of a person who has been braced for impact for so long that when the thing finally happens, the body doesn't know what to do with the absence of tension. She pressed her thumb into the base of her finger and found, this time, that she didn't need to. Paul Reeves was found at 9:11 p.m. in a parking structure 3 blocks from the building, sitting in a car with the engine running and a phone in his hand. He had, according to the man who relayed this to Damien in a brief, low-voiced exchange at the edge of the room, been attempting to reach Veronica Hales for 40 minutes. She had not answered. Damien received this information with the face of a man receiving a weather report. He nodded once. He said, "Keep him there." He went back to the table. She watched all of this. She filed it away. "He was trying to warn her," she said. "Yes." She wasn't answering because she'd already filed the conduct review and thought she was ahead of it. She thought the weapon was deployed and she was waiting for the fallout. Damien looked at her. She didn't know the weapon had already been disarmed. The legal call lasted 22 minutes. She sat through it, occasionally answering a question directed at her, but mostly listening to the architecture of consequence being assembled in real time. Lawyers using precise language to describe what they had, what it meant, and what needed to happen before morning. Chen, whose last name was apparently the only name anyone used, spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who had done this before and found the timeline aggressive but workable. Federal contacts were mentioned. HR protocols were discussed. The conduct review file was addressed directly. Evidence of fabrication, the account creation metadata, the timing that established it as a preemptive weapon rather than a legitimate complaint. When the call ended, Chen said, "We move at 6 a.m. Federal coordinated with our legal team. HR is being briefed through a separate channel in the next hour. The conduct review is flagged as suspect pending investigation." A pause. "Ms. Vale, I'd recommend you not return to the office before 6 a.m. "Understood," she said. "Your IT contacts, Webb and Adeyemi, they'll be contacted tonight with their protective documentation." "Thank you." The call disconnected. The room was quieter now. 2 of the laptop people had moved to a different area, still working. The rain had shifted. Lighter now, less aggressive. The kind of rain that comes after the main event and doesn't quite know how to stop. Damien stood at the window. She stood beside him, Not because she'd planned to, but because it was where she'd ended up when she'd moved to get water from a table against the wall, and the window was there, and the city was there. And it seemed like the natural place to be after 2 weeks of not being able to see the full shape of anything. They stood without speaking for a moment. It was the first moment that had that quality, of not needing to produce something. "The Zoom call," she said. He looked at her. "Reeves set it up." "Yes," Damien said. He controlled the calendar invites for that session. He had access to the distribution lists for both meetings. "He sent you an invite that routed to our call instead of yours." "Why me specifically?" Damien was quiet for a moment. He turned back to the window. "Because you'd written the proposal. He knew I'd respond to it. He needed me running an internal investigation through a civilian asset while he moved the last transfers." A pause. "He chose well, in a sense. You were the right person for what he needed. He used me to distract you." "He tried to." Damien's jaw shifted. "He miscalculated what would happen when I actually read what you'd written." She absorbed that. She looked out at the city. "What did you think when you read it?" "I thought, this person understands how organizations actually work instead of how they're supposed to work." He said it simply, without dressing it as a compliment. Just a fact. "And then I thought, she noticed the vendor anomaly. She noticed it 6 months ago and wrote it down instead of ignoring it. Most people ignore it." "I didn't know what I'd found." "You knew it was wrong. That's sufficient." He turned slightly toward her. "The proposal was good, by the way, not just adequate. Actually good." "I know," she said. Something shifted in his expression again. That almost amusement she'd first seen at a dinner table 11 days ago. "Yes," he said. "You do." She left the building at 11:15. The rain had stopped. The streets had that particular post-rain quality, dark and reflective. The world doubled in the puddles, lights laid flat across wet pavement. The car was waiting, same driver, no words necessary. She called Ethan from the back seat. He answered immediately, which meant he hadn't been asleep, which meant he'd been sitting with a phone and something that felt like fear for the better part of the evening. "Are you okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, because she was done with the managed version, "No, not entirely. But I'm safe and it's handled. And I need to tell you the real version of everything." A long silence. "Okay. Not tonight. Tonight I'm going to come home and sleep, and tomorrow I need you to clear your morning." "It's that much?" "It's that much." She heard him exhale slowly. "All right," he said. He said it the way he sometimes said things, simply, without asking her to manage it, just accepting the shape of what was coming. It reminded her of what she'd once liked about him before the accumulated weight of 2 years of small evasions had made it hard to see clearly. She didn't know yet what they were, on the other side of all this. She didn't know what she wanted them to be, but she was going to have that conversation honestly, which was more than she'd been capable of 3 weeks ago. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, she said. "I'll be up," he said. The 6 a.m. movement was something she wasn't present for, but she felt it anyway. She was at her kitchen table at 6:17, coffee in hand, when Marcus called. His voice had the quality of someone who had slept approximately 2 hours and was running on the specific adrenaline of watching something enormous happen in real time. "They're here," he said. "How many?" "Federal agents, 3. Damien's legal team, 2 people I don't recognize. They went straight to HR and then to the executive floor." A pause in which she could hear, distantly, the sound of the office behind him. Voices raised, the quality of a space that has just understood something is wrong. "Veronica's not here yet. She's supposed to be in at 8. She'll be intercepted before she gets to the building," Sienna said. "How do you know?" "Because that's how you do it. You don't let them reach the building. You don't let them have the symbolic moment of walking in as if they still belong there." Marcus was quiet for a second. "You've thought about this a lot." "I've had a long 2 weeks." He laughed, a short, tired, genuine laugh that she felt, from 20 blocks away, as something close to warmth. "They're asking for Dio, officially. In a good way. His IT security findings are being cited as central to the forensic investigation." "Good. Make sure he's documented." "He's already talked to Chen." A pause. Who is Chen? Someone who gets things done, she said. She heard in the background of the call a shift in the office's ambient noise, voices she didn't recognize. A door. They're on the floor, Marcus said. His voice dropped slightly. This is real, isn't it? It's been real for 3 weeks, she said. We're just at the part where other people can see it. She went in at 9. Not because anyone asked her to, because it was her building too. Her floor, her desk, her 3 years of looking at a parking structure. And she was not going to let the first time she set foot in it afterward be someone else's timeline. The floor was different. Not visually. The monitors were the same. The motivational posters were the same. The smell of burnt coffee was the same. But the atmosphere had the specific quality of a space where something irreversible has recently occurred. People were at their desks with the careful posture of individuals who are processing something and trying to look like they aren't. Veronica's glass office was empty. The blinds were open. The expensive chair was behind the desk, exactly where it always was. The boss lady mug was on the desk with its old coffee ring. Everything in the office was exactly as it had been, except for the absence of the person who had occupied it for 9 years, and that absence was louder than anything else in the room. She'd been intercepted in the parking garage of her building at 6:45. Marcus told her this later, relaying what he'd heard from someone who'd heard it from building security. She'd arrived in her car, and there had been federal agents and 2 attorneys from Damien's legal team waiting, and whatever conversation had taken place in that garage had ended with Veronica Hales walking back to her apartment with the specific knowledge that her access card number longer worked, and her offshore accounts had been flagged pending investigation, and the conduct review she'd filed the previous afternoon had been formally invalidated pending evidence of fabrication. She had not come to the office. She had not made a scene. Sienna had expected to feel more when she heard this. She'd expected something sharper. Satisfaction, maybe, or the particular catharsis of a long wrong being righted in a visible way. What she felt instead was tired, and underneath the tired was something quieter, like the moment after a very loud sound when you realize the sound has stopped and you can hear again. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. Marcus rolled his chair over. "You okay?" he said. "Ask me in a week. Dio wants to know if he's going to get fired. He's going to get promoted," she said. "Tell him that." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "What are you now?" he said. Not unkindly, just the question. "I'm not sure yet," she said. "But I think I'm something different than I was." She met with Damien Moretti's executive team 3 days later. Not a dinner, not a private room, a conference room on the 38th floor of a building she'd never been in before. Moretti Global's Chicago headquarters, a floor she'd had no reason to access when she was a digital marketing specialist with a view of a parking structure. The room had a long table and a view of the lake that was, on a clear November morning, the color of hammered pewter. The meeting lasted 2 hours. She didn't spend it being evaluated. She spent it working, actual work, the kind she'd been trying to do for 3 years, with people who asked real questions and expected precise answers and didn't look at her the way Veronica had looked at her, with that constant preemptive management of someone they'd already decided was a ceiling. Damien wasn't in the meeting. His presence was structural. The agenda, the mandate, the particular tone of an organization that reflected, at every level, the habits of mind of the person at the top of it. She felt it without seeing it, the way you feel a current in water you're already swimming through. At the end of the meeting, Claire, whose voice she recognized from the phone call weeks ago, and who was, in person, exactly as contained and precise as she'd imagined, placed a folder in front of her. Offer letter. Director of Digital Strategy, Moretti Global Holdings. She looked at the title, and then at the number on the compensation line, and then she looked at Claire. "This is what you agreed to at the original offer," Claire said. "Mr. Moretti has added a provisions section on page 3. He'd like you to review it." Page 3 had 2 provisions. One was a formal mandate to implement the restructuring proposal, her proposal, the one she'd written over 11 evenings, across all applicable Hargrove digital divisions within the first quarter. The second provision was a line she read twice because it was unusual enough that she wanted to make sure she'd understood it. The holder of this position has direct standing to raise operational concerns at the board level, bypassing divisional management where the holder determines it necessary. She looked at Claire. He wants to make sure you can't be managed into silence, Claire said. His words. Sienna looked at the provision for a moment longer. Then she turned to the back page and signed. Paul Reeves entered into a cooperation agreement with federal investigators in the second week of November. He provided documentation, communication records, and the account details for 3 offshore entities. In exchange, he received a reduced charge. He lost his license to practice law. He did not go to prison, which was the part of the outcome that sat in Sienna's chest with the particular weight of imperfect justice, the kind of result that is the best available and still not the one you wanted. Veronica Hales did not cooperate. Her trial was scheduled for the following spring. Sienna would be called as a witness, which was something she thought about sometimes in the way you think about a distant appointment that is also, in some sense, necessary, not dreaded, not anticipated, just marked on the horizon as a thing that will have to be lived through and then lived past. The money, $6.8 million in total, was largely recovered. Not entirely. Offshore accounts had been partially liquidated in the months before the investigation closed in. The gap was real, a number that represented what theft actually costs beyond the legal resolution. Damien had absorbed it with the particular stoicism of a man who understood that some costs were the price of having trusted someone he shouldn't have, and that the appropriate response was to learn the lesson without performing the regret. She respected that more than she would have expected to. 6 months after the night in the rain-lit room 40 floors above Chicago, Sienna Vale stood in the executive boardroom of Moretti Global Holdings and presented the second quarter results of the digital strategy restructuring. The room held 12 people. She knew most of them by now. Their habits, their questions, the particular ways they pushed back on projections they found too optimistic or too conservative. She had learned in 6 months how to inhabit this room without holding her breath, which had been harder than she'd expected and more important than she could have anticipated. The numbers were good, not spectacular. Restructuring was a slow machine, and she'd built the proposal knowing that, and she'd refused to dress the timeline up for the room because this was a room that could tell when you were dressing something up, and it respected you more for not trying. Revenue trajectory was ahead of the 18-month projection by 8%. Customer acquisition cost in the renegotiated digital channels was down 22% from the same quarter the previous year. The content integration framework she'd proposed on page 9 of a document written at a kitchen table was now operating across 7 acquired properties, with a unified strategic voice that had, measurably, reduced cross-property contradiction in messaging by what the data called significant and what she called, privately, obvious. When she finished, the room asked questions. Good ones. She answered them. Someone pushed back on the Q3 projection. She held her position, explained her reasoning, and watched the person who'd pushed back nod with the particular quality of someone who has just found out you know what you're doing. At the end of the meeting, people filed out. Damien stayed. He was standing at the window, the same posture she'd seen on a rainy Thursday night, jacket on now, looking at the lake. She was packing up her laptop. She didn't look up when she said, "The Q3 number holds. I ran it 4 times. I know," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she'd been learning to read over 6 months. Not warm, not cold, not the pure calculation she'd initially taken it for. Something more layered. The look of a man who had built a career on seeing what people were capable of before they knew it themselves, and who found it occasionally surprising when they confirmed the estimate. "Good meeting," he said. "It was," she said, not demurring, just agreeing. He looked at the lake for a moment. "I owe you an answer," he said. She stopped packing. She straightened. She waited. "The Zoom call," he said. She'd thought about this question over 6 months. She'd had a dozen opportunities to ask it directly. She'd chosen not to, each time, for reasons she'd told herself were professional and suspected were something more complicated. "Reeves sent the link," she said. "I know that." "He did." Damien turned from the window. "He sent it because he needed a distraction. He didn't know what you'd say when you got on that call. He assumed you'd apologize and disconnect in 30 seconds, and he'd have accomplished a minor disruption." A pause. "He underestimated you, significantly." "So did everyone else," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. But here's the part that isn't Reeves. He moved toward the table, stopped at the corner of it, arms crossed. I knew within the first 90 seconds that you weren't a distraction. I knew before you finished the first offense of page 4 that you were something else entirely. I could have dismissed you. I could have let you disconnect and had my team pull the proposal anonymously without involving you further. A pause. I chose not to. Why? Because in 30 years of acquiring companies and assessing people, I have met very few individuals who notice what's wrong, understand why it matters, and have the nerve to say so out loud to someone who could end their career. His voice was level, not a compliment, an observation. You did all 3 in a Zoom call you weren't supposed to be in, with someone you didn't know. That's not a skill you find in a job posting. She held his gaze. The lake was behind him, pewter and wide and cold. So it wasn't an accident, she said. Not entirely. Reeves created the accident, Damien said. What happened after it was a choice? She thought about 11 evenings at a kitchen table. She thought about a folder on a server room shelf with her name on it. She thought about rain on a window 40 floors up and a forensic audit spread between them and 50 minutes on a clock. For the record, she said, I knew the proposal was good. I wrote it because I knew it was good, and I knew nobody who had the power to implement it was going to read it. I wasn't writing it for you. I know, he said. I was writing it because it was the right thing to do for a company that was doing it wrong. I know that too. She picked up her laptop. She looked at him one more time. Next quarter's projection is going to be more aggressive, she said. I want approval to expand the integration to 3 additional properties. You'll have it, he said. Bring me the proposal. She nodded. She walked to the door. Sienna. She stopped. The answer to your question, he said. The one you've been not asking for 6 months. She turned slightly. Was any of it an accident? His expression had that quality again, the one that lived at the precise edge of what it was. The link was Reeves. The rest? A pause. The first genuine pause she'd seen from him, the kind that wasn't a technique but an actual moment of choosing words carefully. The rest was the most competent person I'd found in 3 years of looking, sitting in a meeting she wasn't supposed to be in, refusing to apologize for it. He looked at her steadily. I don't let those moments pass. She stood at the door for a moment. She looked at him. This man who had turned her whole working life inside out and handed it back to her larger than it was, who had run her like an asset and protected her like something else, whose trust was not warmth, but was, she'd come to understand, in some ways more durable than warmth. Neither do I, she said. She walked out. Marcus got his promotion in January. Corporate security, as it turned out, had a significant gap in its operational intelligence function, and Dio had spent 6 months quietly demonstrating that he was the person to fill it. Marcus went with him, lateral in title, substantial in actual function, the kind of move that looked modest on paper and was anything but. The day Marcus packed his desk, she walked over and stood there while he worked. You good? She said. I'm excellent, he said, and then without looking up, you know this all happened because you had a face. I told you I didn't have a face. You had a face, he said. That Monday morning, you had the face of someone who'd just seen something that changed everything and was trying to figure out whether to be terrified or grateful. He folded a coffee mug into a box. You figure it out yet? She thought about that. Both, she said, in roughly equal amounts. He looked up. He smiled, a real one, the kind that didn't need anything from her in return. Yeah, he said. That sounds about right. But she and Ethan ended it in February. Not badly. Not with an explosion or a betrayal or anything that would make a clean story. They ended it the way things end when 2 people have been honest with each other for long enough to see clearly, with a long conversation at the kitchen table where she'd spent so many evenings writing things nobody asked her to write, and an acknowledgement that they were different people than they'd been when they started, and that the shape of what they'd been was no longer the shape of what either of them needed. He cried a little. She didn't, which she'd expected, and then she did later alone, which she hadn't expected but which felt correct. Not grief exactly, but the honest weight of 2 years and the things that had been real in them, set down properly instead of just put aside. She called him once, 2 months later, to tell him that his name had been kept out of every document and every proceeding, as promised. He thanked her. She said it wasn't necessary. There was a brief silence of two people who knew each other well enough to know there was nothing left to say, and then they said goodbye with the particular mutual kindness of people who have done each other some harm and some good and are choosing to remember mostly the good. She thought that was probably the most honest thing they'd ever done for each other. The city looked different in April. Not the city itself. Chicago remained what it was, indifferent, continuous, moving at its own speed toward its own destinations. But she looked at it differently, from a different floor, with a different set of facts about what she was capable of, and what she was willing to do, and what she was no longer willing to accept. She was at her desk on the 38th floor when she got the notification that Veronica Hales had entered a guilty plea. She read the notification twice. Then she set her phone down and looked out at the lake, which was just becoming itself again after winter, gray still, but moving, the surface broken and alive instead of sealed. She didn't feel triumphant. She'd known she wouldn't, and she'd known that the absence of triumph wouldn't mean the absence of something worth having. It meant something quieter, a correction. A wrong thing made right at significant cost by people who were willing to pay it. That was not nothing. In fact, she was beginning to understand it was the whole thing. She picked up her phone. She pulled up the encrypted drive. The original proposal was still there. The 11 evening version, the one written at a kitchen table in the dark before anyone was paying attention. She opened it and looked at the first page for a moment. Then she closed it and opened the current version, which was 4 times as long and actively implemented across 9 properties and had been presented to a board 12 people strong by a woman who no longer pressed her thumb into the base of her finger to keep herself standing. She started working. Outside, spring was arriving in Chicago the way things arrive when they've been a long time coming. Not gently, not dramatically, just finally. The lake caught the morning light and held it briefly before letting it go, the way water does, the way everything does eventually. She worked. The day moved around her. The city kept going. And somewhere behind her, at the edge of her awareness, was the knowledge, not triumphant, not dramatic, just solid and true, that she had walked into the wrong meeting and refused to leave, and the rest of it had followed from there, as things do when you finally stop apologizing for taking up the right amount of space. She had never gotten a direct answer. She had stopped needing one.